Just don't be like me, don't be stubborn. Simply throwing up homemade treatment on the walls does not mean that your room is done or is as finished as it can be. Hello friends, I've been working with a company called GIK Acoustics for a couple of months now on my studio and on this video in particular. This video has not been paid for by GIK, but they did provide a small discount towards the products that I have now installed in my studio. I felt like it was important to be transparent about everything from the off. Anyway, I've just spent $5,000 fixing my studio. It turns out I made a mistake around about 8 years ago when I first built my studio. That mistake has been making my life harder without me really knowing. I made a mistake. This video may turn out to be a little bit longer, but if you don't have time right now to watch all of it, please hit save, subscribe to the channel, and come back to it when you do have time. The knowledge here is pretty important, and it took me a long time to accrue. With that in mind, there's quite a lot of misinformation on the internet, and it makes it quite hard to understand who to turn to and what to trust. It makes it tricky for us to understand what makes a difference and is it relevant to you, whether it's professional or you're just enjoying yourself with your own home setup. I'm about to share my entire journey that spans over a year about everything that I had to learn in order to fix the mistake that I made when I first started out. And I've just realized that my camera is wonky. Cool. Probably about time to walk you through the mistakes I made early on in my career, the surprises I've discovered along the way, and how it was eventually resolved. Oh, and obviously there's going to be gear porn, and I get to show you how well I did, how well we did. So, shall we begin? There are a few golden rules in audio. I guess actually in any sort of job there's golden rules, but these are the ones that I work with. Back up your computer to more than one place. Measure once, cut twice. No, wait, that's the other way around. And don't go hastily making huge changes to your setup or room before an important project. So, why did I decide to tear my studio apart and change absolutely everything before one of the most important records of my life came in? That's what I did. I'm smart. It's a little messy, and ultimately it's my fault, and I've essentially been covering my tracks for the mistakes that I made when initially building this room. It's probably best to start with how I built the studio in the first place. At the beginning, I built a room. A bad sounding one, and this was for the studio. I did this by building it myself without professional advice. This bad design happened through lack of information and honestly pure stubbornness when I was in my early 20s. The result was, although the studio was finished, it was compromised acoustically without my realization. The first stage for this was I had put a mezzanine level in the room. I thought this would be a clever hangout spot, put a TV and a games console up there, but that didn't really end up happening. And the other downside to this is it splits the room in two and was just difficult as an obstacle to work around acoustically. I also built around 8 to 10 acoustic panels. However, I built them in such a way where I didn't do enough research into the type of rock wool, which is the insulation that goes on the inside of them. I didn't do enough research as to what specific type of rock wool I was supposed to fill them with. It turns out, depending on how thick the panel you're going to make is, the density of the rock wool that goes in it has to change with the thickness of the panel. The reason for this is down to physics and gas flow rigidity. Yep, the TLDR is the panels that I made weren't as effective as they could have been for the problem areas that I wanted them to treat. So, you know, awesome, I screwed myself from day one. Obviously, it's quite disheartening to learn several years later what I had done. My room was stale, and I couldn't just add more things into the room in order to try and help the problem, because up until this point, in order to balance out the room, I was using software like SonarWorks to simply get by and hide the performance of my room. Doing so had a knock-on effect of my speaker performance, my Amphions. It limited their quality as a result. The way this works is because the SonarWorks curve was aggressive. I'm talking quite aggressive. It was in places. I'll put a screenshot up of the old sweep of what it was doing. You can see that it was fixing maybe 12 dB worth of dip. Ideally, you don't want anything that's going to start mucking around with the effective dynamic range of your speakers. This isn't a fault of Sonarworks, this is my fault for not understanding what I was doing. So I decided to make some changes to see if it would have a positive impact on the room. My typical gut reaction to problem solving in situations like this is to try and not throw money at it. It's very easy to try and spend your way out of something, but if you don't really understand what you're trying to affect or change, you just keep spending money and you don't earn any knowledge as a result. My initial thought process was taking out the mezzanine should help. I mean, it makes sense that it would have an impact, but I just didn't know what it was. My short-term plan was take the mezzanine out, rescan Sonarworks, and have a look at what changed. Maybe there would be less pressure on the speakers and I'd get, you know, an additional performance boost back from that. That seemed sensible. My friend Jim and I took the mezzanine out, and you can see the process of that happening in this video that I released last year. Link, you know, in the places where links go. And it was going really well. We got the mezzanine out. There was a lot of mess, but then this happened. We went into lockdown. Jim had to go home, and I was left with a room that was sawdust. Taking the mezzanine out solved some issues, but it didn't solve all my issues. And I didn't have the option of going out and doing things in person and going and getting stuff because the country got put on pause. It was time to get a professional in. I just couldn't avoid spending money anymore. I had to understand what was going on. I'm not gonna lie, my ego was damaged. I felt a little bit deflated. I thought I should be capable enough in order to solve it, but you can't just solve everything with Google and going full speed with power tools all the time. As much as I would like to think that you can, it was just time to talk to someone that knows what they're doing. Enter GIK. I reached out to GIK and I talked to Chris about what I was going through and the opportunity that was available here, and I asked if they'd be up for collaborating on some content together. I explained my initial gut reaction about what I needed the room to do, but then I said this space just needs to be as good as it can be without making me cry on the invoice at the end of it. I figured that by letting go of control, this was the best way to understand what to do. It's very uncomfortable for me to do that, but in the same way that they know what they're doing, I had to trust them, so I gave it a shot. So this is what GIK helped with. First, we control the room with bespoke panels and tuned treatment. So this is to attend to the RT60. Then secondly, we then work on the speaker placement in order to get the best response from those in the room. Now, although I've already explained it, at that point in time, it hadn't occurred to me that those two stages would be separate. The idea being is that once you've treated the room as a room and gotten the RT60 to a place where it can be as happy as possible, you have more freedom with speaker placement. You have more options available to you because the room is more neutral and more controlled in itself. However, this then does become the point where you start playing the game of move the speakers, and it's not, I'm not gonna lie, it is a really boring game. So let's take a look at where that money has gone. I placed the order, and with lockdown still in full effect, it meant that I had to revamp the room largely on my own, along with my dad. That was until Jim was allowed out of coronavirus jail and could help finalise the studio with me. It sounds straightforward, however, there was a few things that went wrong with emails, and I didn't know until 4 days before they got delivered that they were going to get delivered. So I was in the middle of this project, room in chaos, mixing on wonky speakers and headphones, and then I had to flip the whole room in 4 days. However, as a result of having to work on headphones for that amount of time, because the room was in transition and everything was chaos, I learned a couple of lessons about headphones, and actually some really positive ones. I made a video about that, and it's, again, links where the links go. You'll have to see the video to understand where I got to with that. But we got there in the end, in the middle of summer, with no aircon, and 4 days to do it. Thank you, Dad. Honestly, thank you. Here we are. Ready for some sexy B-roll of the studio? Here we go. finally it is done, or at least it's as close to done as I can tolerate at the moment, and I'm happy with the result at a point where I can share my space with you all. It took, looking back through my notes, almost a year of trial and error to understand and resolve, and so I applaud all of you that made it this far into the video. Apparently 56% of people click away after the halfway point, so if you're still here, you are better than the majority of people that watch my stuff. So what did I learn? How do we summarize? What can I share with you that you can take away and use to your own benefit? Find the right people first. Just don't be like me. Don't be stubborn. Simply throwing up homemade treatment on the walls does not mean that your room is done or is as finished as it can be. Fortunately, GIK provided me with free, no commitment consultation, and they will do the same for you. I probably should have used them earlier on in my career. And actually, honestly, this is one of my greatest regrets. I could have skipped a lot of this. Lesson number 2, the response doesn't have to be perfectly flat. This was something that was a bit of a revelation to me, and possibly another video in itself, because with the amount of information that I've gathered, the short version is I got my room perfectly flat at one point, and I hated it. It didn't work, it wasn't fun, and it didn't suit the way that I want to hear things. Because before this point, honestly, my goal was to get a perfect, amazingly flat response, an unquestionable performance. What it turns out is that our ears and brains are really smart and a lot better at adjusting to different rooms and sounds and environments than we give it credit for. It's probably another video, but I found that fascinating that what we're sold as the ideal is not what we need. I guess that shouldn't be so surprising after, all the Instagram Insta-fit people and all this sort of stuff with everyone should have 6-packs, but does that really matter? The third lesson, and it's not the one that I thought I'd be sharing in this video, but I am, is that if you're going to get a subwoofer, get one that has DSP in it. Specifically, EQ, not so much a big deal, but for time aligning, so that you can delay signals. Often, your best sub placement is not in line with your speakers. Placing subs in a room is really difficult. And if I didn't have DSP, I could not have gotten the studio to the condition that it's in now. For those of you that are interested, the sub that I opted for is the Dynaudio 18S. I have no issues. It's the first Dynaudio product that I've ever bought, and it does its job. And when you're in this situation, that's all you can really ask for, is to be able to hear what you need and for it to be kept simple. All right. So, big journey. This took me a year to get here. So that means it took me a year to get to the point where I could make this video for you all. Big thank you to Chris and everyone else at GIK. Let's just hope that you all like the records that I make from here on out. Can you imagine if I did all of this? And then all the stuff that comes out, everyone's like, nah mate, it was better when you had a mezzanine. It's not going to happen, but I'll do, if there's enough talk about it, I'll do another video where I go into depth about the setup, and the change and everything outside of the sexy B-roll. And we can probably do a video about speakers, because I've tried more speakers in here than I like to admit over the last 4 months since changing the room. Actually, there are no Amphions up on the stands right now. Different brand in front of me. They look good. They sound good. But I've learned a lot through that process that could help you make purchasing decisions. I don't know. I'm just rambling at this point because I don't want to end the video, because it means I have to go back to work if I do. There is a link in the description which takes you through to GIK and talking to the guys there about your room. If you have questions, if you need help, they will be fantastic. Feel free to reference me. They'll look after you, I promise. So, what do you think? I think the space turned out pretty nice. I'm really happy being in here now. What are your experiences like with acoustic treatment? What are the things that you struggled with? Did you find any solutions that maybe I should know about? Thank you for getting this far. Thank you to GIK. Start a conversation in the comments and I'll catch up with you there. But until next time, don't be a dick. Eat your goddamn vegetables and don't put a mezzanine in your room and hate yourself for 7 years of your life. All right, cheers, thank you, goodbye. Yeah, bye.